Welcome to Ed 200. I will be talking about the educational giant Thomas Aquinas. But to do that, I've required a little help.
Thomas Aquinas died on March the 7th, 1274, and ascended to heaven. 49 years later, he became a saint, and in 1879, Pope Leo XIII pronounced that Aquinas' work was the only true philosophy.
Well, that's a pretty good introduction, eh? But what does that really have to do with the class that we're taking, Education 200? That's one of the questions that I want you to contemplate as you watch this next video.
Aquinas spent much of his life agonizing over the question of the existence of God, and being a Catholic monk, it's unsurprising which answer he leaned towards. Being a great fan of Aristotle, Aquinas took a lot of Aristotle's philosophies and applied them to his own work. He thought Aristotle was a pretty awesome guy. Aquinas believed that there were two ways to arrive at the truth. Some things could be understood through reason and logic, other things through faith, and that's perfectly possible to prove the existence of God a priori, or through reason alone. Aquinas' philosophical writings are one of the best ever attempts at grounding the Judeo-Christian faith in logical reasoning, and the Catholic Church thought this was pretty great. Aquinas believed that theology was a science, and attempted to formulate arguments supporting the Church's doctrine on the grounds of rational thinking.
This emphasis on logical reasoning, or
a priori, or through reason alone,
is really what makes Thomas Aquinas the educational giant that we want to look at. In many ways, Thomas Aquinas did not only build up these ideas within the Catholic area, but because the Catholics were one of the most high esteemed educational areas, this actually spread throughout the entire educational system.
In order to appreciate Aquinas, it is necessary to distinguish, as far as possible, between his theology and his philosophy. The former is absolutely correct on all counts and beyond question. Anyone who doubts this courts instant excommunication and the prospect of an afterlife in a third-world-style region devoid of modern domestic conveniences. Philosophy, on the other hand, is something whose truth is open to question. This is what makes philosophy what it is. Even in Aquinas' time, there was an implicit difference between theology and philosophy. Both conducted their arguments in a similar fashion, by deduction, reason, logic, and so forth. But in theology, such knowledge was based upon the revealed truth of faith. The first principles of theology were supported by a belief in God. Philosophy, on the other hand, required no such belief. It began from first principles, which were allegedly self-evident. These relied upon our apprehension of the world around us and the use of reason alone.
The use of logic was not really something new, and the first principle talked about come way before him. It started with Descartes. So what is it that really makes Thomas Aquinas such an important educational giant, and what impact does it really have on the 21st century that we live in today, that we should even be bothered with some of this? Let's hear what Father Brandon has to talk about this.
You wonder now, why would this 13th century theological master be so important for the 21st century? Three things came to my mind. There are many others, but three especially. The first one is, Thomas Aquinas saw with utter clarity that truth is one, since all truth finally comes from the one God, who is truth itself. Therefore, there can never be a conflict between the truths of science and the truths of faith. During his own time in the 13th century in Paris, where he taught, there was a group that advocated the double truth theory, which said, well, there are two sets of truths. There are religious truths and there are philosophical or scientific truths. And they might be at odds with each other, they might be in contradiction, but you have to sequester. One is philosophical, the other is religious, and they can exist, even contradictory truths, side by side. Well, Thomas Aquinas thought that was so much nonsense and said so, and made a very public case of it. I think this is very important for our time when we see in the minds of way too many people this conflict between faith and reason, between religion and science. Again, Thomas would say, if there is an apparent conflict between a clearly known scientific truth and a religious truth, either we're dealing with bad science or bad religion. We need to think more deeply, more creatively about what's at stake.